Will he grow up to be a boy who doesn't know how to look at women any other way? So while you play your role, you also become conscious of the fact that you have a son who's growing up who equally needs to look at women, learn to treat women in a certain way when the dialogue all around you is absolutely opposing.
Hello, listeners. My name is Mridvika, and this is Just an Ordinary Mom podcast. I really am just an ordinary mom to twin boys with a high speed career, and this podcast is to tell the stories of ordinary moms doing extraordinary things. On our show today, we have Anupma Gajwani from Delhi, who runs a full service visual communication studio under the aegis of Studio A. She has over 20 years of experience in providing graphic design solutions, branding and corporate communication strategy to national and transnational clients. She did her undergraduate degree in economics from Delhi University and her master's degree in visual arts from the Birmingham Institute of Art and Design in England. Before establishing Studio A, she had a flourishing corporate career as multimedia director with Magic Software, one of the first internet companies that India saw. In the episode today, she talks about raising a son as a single mother, evolving relationship with her partner as they chose to co-parent their son, finding her own niche as a solopreneur, staying relevant for her son as he transitioned from being a boy to a teenager to a college student and now a full-time working professional. She unapologetically talks about what it meant to be ahead of her times in literally everything she chose to do and owning up to the consequences of the decisions she made. Welcome, Anupma. Thanks so much for making the time to speak with me today.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we get started with you telling me a little bit about, what growing up was like for you? Maybe we can start from your childhood. How was it growing up in an artistic household where your dad exposed you to all forms of art form, from camera to painting to video shoots? What was that experience like?
Absolutely brilliant. I have very, very fond memories of my childhood. So I'm the oldest of the three siblings. I have two younger brothers. And my father is an artist. He was educated in art. And my mother did her master's in political science. But after she got married, she chose to be a homemaker with my dad. And we lived in a joint family. My grandparents lived with us. And from what I remember of my childhood, we constantly had visitors. It was an open house. My parents being very, very large-hearted about everybody who came in. And being based in Delhi, anybody who transited, visited, wanted to stay, come for interviews, be educated, we were their open house for them. So that was what my childhood was like. We migrated, my grandparents, from Pakistan, as a lot of families did. We are Sindhis. So we lived in Rajouri Garden. It was a tiny house, but large-hearted, welcoming. My dad chose to be an artist. I grew up with lots of colors, lots of international theater, lots of international exhibitions. So every which way, it was contemporary, it was open, it was also conventional with a lot of, we celebrated all festivals. So it was an amazing amalgamation of what the West was at that time, because my father also worked with the American embassy and he painted whenever he had time. So my introduction to art, my introduction to culture, my introduction to theater, my introduction to best of the films and directors in the world was fairly early.
Yeah. No, I remember visiting, your dad and your mom, and it's always been very, very warm and welcoming environment. So I can totally relate to everything that you just said. How did those early years shape you as a person? What were some of the core values or beliefs that you think you drew from those times that have shaped you as an individual today?
I'd have to say the most important learning from my growing up years is kind-heartedness and acceptance of people. That is the largest learning because, like I said, we were a joint family. And when I compare with how we engage with our children, with our elders, with our peers, with our immediate family, that came into us very, very early. The bonds, the family, the value of relationships being non-judgmental and acceptance. I think the two key words are acceptance. And my parents are the gentlest of people. So, it's not that they never had fights. It's not that they never, I wouldn't say fights, I'd say disagreements. So my fondest memories as adults, you see things differently as you do with a child, because children want fun, children want what they want. But when you look back and you see some of your things that have shaped you, is that value of acceptance, cherishing, and you being available for relationships as and when needed is, I think, most valuable now that I look back and I am able to implement a part of it in my relationships as a parent and as a child and as everything I'd say.
Professional.
Yes.
Yeah. So you grew up in times, Anupama, when women role models who went out to work were far and few. Even though your mom completed her education, she decided to play the role of a homemaker. Did that in any way affect your view about the place of a woman in the society? Were there other role models that you had, including your mom, who you looked up to and aspired to be a little bit like them and, do what they were doing?
You're right. Women did not work. They chose to stay at home at the times we grew up in. My mother herself had made a choice. The difference, however, being when she made that choice, it wasn't a feeling of giving up, a feeling of sacrifice. In fact, I remember having this conversation, we lost her last year to COVID, but 3 years ago, I was having this exact same conversation with her. And I asked her, Mom, it would have been hard for you. It would have been really difficult for you because she finished her studies and she was working with a bank. It was a permanent job with a government, right? And she gave that up. But she said, look, it was a choice I made because this was important to me. I had 3 children. We were in a joint family. Fortunately, my dad took on the role of being a complete provider. And she said, that time we really didn't think about if we earned 200 rupees, there was no need for 500 rupees and to add to that income because whatever it was, there was acceptance. Yes, there are 2 equal partners in raising a family. If one person takes charge of the money, the other person needs to be there to make sure that the family gets the other things that only finance will not provide for. And where does that come from? She said, I could have continued. We would have had double the income, but then going to school, having a nutritious food, taking care of the rest of the family. There are visitors. And she said, I don't have a single day's regret because I chose to do this. And for me, this other part of the journey has been so fulfilling that I have not missed working, not professionally, so to say, achieving something for myself. So that is how she felt. And that, I think, from childhood, because we saw that there was no sense of my mother being a woman and having taken that choice, but because the narrative wasn't that of sacrifice and martyrdom, it was a very easy concept of choices that you make for your family. So that was the prime narrative, which I feel that I have really picked that up and learned from my family.
I think it's wonderful that the choices that she made, she fully owned them and didn't sort of let any of the consequences thereafter, affect, how you felt about her or how she felt about herself, because that would have been a difficult narrative to sort of get by. But both your parents have been equal partners in contributing towards family, raising kids. How did that affect your own notion of what kind of life partner you wanted for yourself?
The life partner I had was the one I chose, and this is exactly the life partner I would have chosen. My marriage lasted, I think, about 14 years, which is a long time. And we had our son when 3 years into marriage, 4th year into marriage, in fact, we had our son and we raised him together as a loving family. But somewhere down the line, my relationship with my husband did not work out and we decided to mutually part ways. So that was, again, a choice that was made. But the learnings from what you have in your childhood impact. So despite having formally ended the relationship of a conventional marriage, we have been together as a family and raised our son together, which is a decision we took even, when we were parting ways. That was a choice that was being made. That, look, whatever happens and happens between us, this is the child and has to be raised together with the complete family around. Not to say that there won't have been an impact on the child, or that's a different
I totally agree with you. And I very strongly believe that relationships, they don't fail. They just move on from one phase of life to another. They take a new form. And whether it's a relationship with your toddler to when they become a teenager, or even with your spouse, they move on to becoming, a friend or a co-parent.
There was somebody asked me that you guys are so good together. You have a high regard for each other. Why did you have to break the relationship? And I remember my answer. I said, I have not broken the relationship. We just have mutually redefined it. That's all there is. So,
Yeah, no, totally. And that's very mature. And especially for times when there was stigma around acceptance of such a decision. Like those were the times when, women were socially conditioned to believe that they need, another partner to complete them. And for you to, maturely take a decision like that wouldn't have been easier, for acceptance with friends and family and for yourself and even for the child. So what were some of the things that actually helped you navigate those times that listeners could benefit from?
It wasn't easy at all. And no matter what you say, no matter how brave we become and how many right words and how many justifications we give, it is a hard decision. It was a very, very hard decision. Physically, emotionally, financially, especially if you have a child, it's not an easy one. Before we took that decision finally, it took us 2 years actually to finally, it wasn't that one person decided one day and, you just say, okay, you up and leave. Because it was so hard, it took us 2 years to finally take that step and say, look, maybe we need to take a pause and maybe we need to see where we need to head, where we need to go. So It was a hard one.
Yeah. Achin has grown up to be a wonderful man from the little toddler that I saw him several years ago. But I also know how hard it is to raise a child, and it takes a village to raise them. What was your village like, and how has that shaped your young boy, Anupama?
I think he's now 24. It'll actually be up to him to say how he shaped up, because what we tend to do is tend to take credit for the way he's grown up, which is not fair. And your question is absolutely apt, and I'm so glad you're asking it in the way you are, because it's never one person. So he stayed with me because he was very young. He was in grade 6 when we took that decision, and his father was there, and all the time we spent time together and whatever it was, but he was primarily staying with me, but it's never one person. So I think his family, his grandparents, his uncles, mama, chacha, dada, dadi, nana, nani, initially it was hard accepting the fact that this has happened. And there was a lot of, I would say, suggestion in terms of don't make this choice because there is a child, and don't do this because, how are you going to handle it? And I'd be lying if I said that it does not have an emotional impact. Like you asked me that question, how did your childhood shape you? So he was not a toddler, he was what, all of 10 years old, 11 years old when this happened. But as an adult, when we've had these conversations, I think I'd say because we were an open house and open to having these conversations even early on, he himself said that I did not want to accept and I would hide it from my friends, because I would see my friends that, they come from full homes, they have their parents together, and this has happened with me. But he said later on, when I saw that both of you guys are happy and I'm getting everything I need from a relationship of my parents, he said, then I came to terms with it, and I would have no problem saying that, okay, I'm with my dad or I'm with my mom. Again, we've had this conversation. And he said, later on, when I saw that you guys were both happy and I wasn't really missing out or really was comfortable in both the places and the extended family, he said, then I began to accept and I'm okay. And he says, then I actually saw that you were both happier being as, individually in your own spaces. That was a relief, because I think then I got the best of both. But there were negative influences. Even when I was looking, I remember, for rented spaces as a single parent, and there were realtors who would say, ma'am, aap kyun bol rahe ho? Aap bol do na, aapke husband bahar rehte hain, aap bol do na, aap travel kar rahe ho. It'll be easier for you. I said, main aaj to bol do, but sooner or later, this is going to, I don't want to live in fear of having to hide the choices that I've made. it took me a long time.
Yeah.
I went through about 32 houses before I finally found somebody who'd say, like, okay. And I've heard people, joint families where I was looking for a space and there was a particularly husband, wife, and I could hear them whispering in Punjabi or something that, we've just got married, she's single. What if my wife gets influenced by this? We really don't want that kind of a person living with us, So that is all a part of the reality. I'm absolutely sure that I don't know every single emotion that he would have gone through. All I can say is we've just done the best we could, found support in our immediate tribe, not always, most of the time, and not to blame anybody, because to accept this is hard, especially when this happened 15 years ago, 16 years ago. So
Yeah. Well, Achin's finished his education from a Canadian university now and is working in Canada and making you proud and his dad proud. How has your relationship evolved from his toddler years to teenage years to now that he's a working man himself? When does he lean into you as a mother and when does he lean into you as a friend?
Most of the times as friends now. Most of the time, because he's, like I said, we've had these, since he's come back, he's questioned also what happened between you and dad. Because, like you asked me, what was my childhood like and what were the impacts it had? He's now 24. He's trying to find his ground. He will build his relationships. He will build his friendships. He will build his partnerships. So he has started asking these questions, and he has been for a while, both with his father and me. But now he leans more and more we chat as friends. We discuss pretty much everything. But, having said that, I'd say for me also, I think you always remain a child. You just learn to behave socially. I still find myself leaning on my father as a father, though I talk to him as a friend, because I think if everyone becomes a friend, where do you go when your adulthood is falling apart? You need a space where you say, listen, bahut ho gaya yaar, I need my mom, I need my dad, which I still do with my father until last year with my mom. So, that I hope never changes.
No, very
though they try to be so.
No, it's very true. I think the toughest part of adulting is to see your own parents grow old and trying to sort of like keep that stoic face that, you're there for everyone, but who's there for you when you need to sort of lean in on someone. Anupama, how have you kept yourself relevant for Achin, given the world has become so much more connected and he's young now and access to him through technology is, a click away? What are some of the times that you fight with him and what are some of the times you enjoy, the boon that technology has given us?
That's a lot of questions to think about. But I've not really thought of that way because I always feel parents are always going to be relevant. I may not know how to connect my computer to a Bluetooth immediately, in which case I just like, why can't you just do this for me? And he's like, why are you so daft? So these are the things we always land up with. Your question is so relevant because we go through so many emotions when we are a mother. Am I doing right? So, as a single parent, I had to work. I had to make sure there was money. I had to make sure I have time for him. I have money for him. I have emotional bandwidth for him. How do I keep myself relevant emotionally? How do I keep myself relevant so that I can provide for him, so that he sees me in a certain way, so that I don't lose the connect with my child? And we are living in times where, things change every day. You are competing with technology. You are competing with his own peers. You're competing with other relationships that he's going to build or he currently has constantly. And you are a mother. Clearly, you want your child to have a bond, a relationship that lasts. So it is true. Unfortunately, there is no correct answer. I have fallen. I have tried to be cool. I have tried to do things that I feel I shouldn't have done, but I tried to because I didn't want to, him to feel that he's not provided for. I've gone an extra mile, but then you make these mistakes and you learn eventually to step back and say, hang on, while I'm raising it, and honestly, believe me, I have to bring this up right now because I'm a mother, single mother one, and he doesn't have a sibling. He is a boy growing up in our society where men need to be taught values. So another thing has been, by behaving in a certain way, am I just subconsciously fostering the same values, just imbibing things that will become cliched, and will he grow up to be a boy who doesn't know how to look at women any other way? So while you play your role, you also become conscious of the fact that you have a son who's growing up, who equally needs to look at women, learn to treat women in a certain way, when the dialogue all around you is absolutely opposing. But yes, it's never perfect. There are no right answers. Also, as he says, my God, everybody around me says, you're such an indulgent mother. But then you have to, in your actions, show that you would do that for your child and children around you. It has nothing to do with the fact that you are a boy, so I'm pampering you more. And there are times where, there have been no domestic help. So on one hand, I felt, let me do it for him. But then I have to say, no, let me ask of him, because then it becomes a habit for him in the future. And how will he learn? So these emotions, these things, and then inside of you, there are 200 things going on, and you're able to articulate and behave only 10% of what you actually feel, the choices you make, the fights that go on in your head that don't even translate into real things with your immediate environment, especially with your children and with your parents. So it's never easy, but then you learn to make mistakes. You try and do the best you can. And also, I feel it's important as the parent of a young adult, you open yourself to learning from them. That's very important. Your question of relevance, so after all this story and everything else, comes back to the fact that are you willing to give to them, and are you willing to learn from them? Because the fact is, this is a different generation. Our parents didn't grow up the same way our grandparents did. We didn't grow up the same way our parents did. Our children are not going to be growing up the same way that even we did. So for us to expect that they will behave in the same way and learn from us and lean into us the same way as we still do towards our parents, it's completely, we will be messing with ourselves, if we just don't step back and learn from them and allow them to grow into the people they're meant to be.
Great. What has been the best thing that you've learned from Achin?
He's taken it upon himself, and one of the few things that he blames his parents for, that you were not attentive. You just insisted on eating ghee and talawa and puri, which was your way of showing affection. But you guys need to just turn it around and take care of your health. And if I had healthier parents, I would have been a healthier child. He's really like a chowkidar, mom, don't eat this, mom, don't eat that, mom, don't eat, so don't do this, go to the gym, why are you working out, why are you eating junk? And secondly, because, coming back to how they teach you, this might be a little bit of a digression. I remember, when we had just moved out of, the parted ways, Sanju and I, there was a time where, there was no domestic help. And I told Achin, listen, he was, I think, in grade 10. And, as usual, playing on video games and things, or I was working and I was, doing the jharu, and I told him do the dishes, and then I've kept the milk for boiling and keep an eye on the milk. And sure enough, when I come back, milk has boiled and it has spilled on the, gas. And I was hugely annoyed. I'm like, I told you one task. I said, I just stand here, even if you're playing the video game, look at the milk, and I told you keep an eye on it. And he yelled back at me. He says, Mom, you told me keep an eye on it, but what to expect when it boils? Will it fall off? Will it explode? Will it keep, I remember that was such a huge learning for me. I can't tell you, Mridvika. And this is what I applied even to my professional life. I'm like, hang on. I have peers, I have people who report to me, I have teams that I am responsible for leading. Instead of telling them, okay, take care of this, make sure this happens, but what to expect when it goes wrong. So coming back to how you should keep yourself open, instead of yelling back, I just took a step back. I said, ठीक बोल रहे हैं यार, I told you keep an eye on the milk, but I didn't tell you कि जब उबलेगा और अगर ये उबल गया तो ये गिरेगा. I just told you keep an eye on it. And that is what I mean when when you learn from your children, you don't learn one thing. If you're open to listening to them and able to step back, that is when you keep yourself relevant. That is when you learn from them.
That's amazing. I want to switch gears now and talk a little bit about your growing up journey, the way you decided what educational journey you are going to take and how you steered your career on your own terms. Let's start with you telling me a little bit about what did you study, Anupama, and how did you make that career choice? Because growing up in 80s and 90s, parents expected you to take on, and I'm not saying about your parents, but generally societal construct was such that parents expected you to take on a professional degree like medicine or engineering or law to feel successful themselves and to feel okay that you'll be fine through the rest of your life. So talk to me a little bit about what that decision-making journey for your own education looked like and how did it kickstart your career?
I did my graduation in economics. When I was in grade 8, I'm hugely fond of reading and writing. So when I was in grade 8, I had decided I wanted to do a PhD in English literature. And thankfully, because of the background I have, my parents, if I enjoyed what I was doing, because my father himself in those times had chosen a profession that was anyway unconventional. He was not a doctor, he was not an engineer. He had chosen to be an artist. So to that extent, I'm fortunate that there was no pressure to choose a conventional career path. If you knew that you're passionate about something and if you knew you do justice to it, you were free to, make your choices. And I can say that for my siblings also, both of whom went to art school. And my dad did say, so whether you're an artist and a doctor, so coming back to that question, you are impacted and your parents will tell you from your experiences. And I remember having this conversation even when I said I want to become a writer or I want to pursue economics or I wanted to do this, my dad said, you're very good at art. You're very good at, you intuitively know good design. There is a background. Wouldn't you like to consider being an artist? And I remember we used to see him do book layouts and we used to help him do the artworks. We used to do so. Thankfully, the genes didn't escape us. But because he had made those choices, we were never, forced into or never even. There was gentle nudging as to, my dad said, I can help you with it. And which is why I think our parents also do, because they know there is a legacy, because they know it's like your parents telling you, हमने 2 सीढ़ी तो चढ़ ली है, तुम तीसरी से चालू करो before going back and starting from zero again. I think our parents guiding us and asking her to do, get into doctors and engineering because you understand that now, because they say, look, we've already done this groundwork. If you make this choice, it'll be probably 2 steps easier for you and you can take off from where we left. We have people we know, we have, contacts because we've already done that groundwork. So I think now when you look back, you see those, even conventionally when parents push you to do that, I think it's more from that point of view. Somewhere the rationale gets lost and you're not able to articulate, but that way there was no push and pull. And so I did economics and then I realized after doing economics, no, this is not what I want to do. And I joined an IT firm because I'd also done, while I was graduating, postgraduate diploma in PR and advertising and in systems management. I like to do a lot of different things. So I got an opportunity to join this for 5 years. And when I gave up as a director, and that time software, internet, we were one of the very first few people to get into internet and web development. The first website, in fact, I worked with my organization was ITC when internet was unheard of. We brought out the first multimedia, CD when multimedia people didn't even know what is mouse, what is UI. And we had brought out this. So I worked with research, I worked with technology and hugely passionate about what I did because I wrote, I researched, I was being introduced to technology very early. And I gave up my job after my son was born. So I did go back to work, 5th year into my work, 6th year into my work. I was expecting and I worked till, I think, I went on my maternity leave and in 2 days, Achin was born. And I asked for an extended 3 months because I wasn't ready to go back. And we were a nuclear family. We didn't have in-laws staying with us. We were very much at that time nuclear family choices that most people had started making at that point. So I went back for 2 months and I realized it was a very, very difficult choice at that point because I was doing very well. My husband was doing very well. The child had just been born and we had started from scratch because it was, that proud thing. We don't want to take anything from our parents. We want to do, you romanticize your life. You want to do it from scratch. You want to build your life together. You want to provide for yourself and your children. So we were going through, and clearly we were at that stage where we had just invested in our first house. And for me to, for us, in fact, it wasn't my choice, because as my husband and I debated about it, we were like, what do we do? Because, we've just invested, there are loans we've taken, and we are a double income family, and we've got this child now. There's already commitments that have been made financially. So I went back for 2 months because we had somebody full time. Even when I was expecting, I said, we will need support. And I had not thought that I'll give up my work. We had spoken about all this. There was no question about it. And we had somebody full time who would transition into, by the time the child was born. So there was domestic help already available, and we had taken these decisions. But when we were faced with it, I would come back so tired. For no reason of this child, I would start yelling at him, because clearly I've come back after 9-10 hours of working, and he's asking for my attention, he's crying, and I'm yelling. I'm like, Achin, I'm so tired. So for a few months it was, but then we had a conversation. I'm like, look, this cannot continue, because the fact is that we have a child. So either we continue like this, get more domestic help, and continue on our journey that we have already set, or we make a gear shift and say, long term, this is going to impact the child. And that time you don't know whether it's the right decision or not, because you fear for yourself, because you feel this huge sense of irrelevance. If I leave my job, I'll become irrelevant. I've studied, I've worked hard to get here. What do I do? Will I only become a mother? Will I become, how do I make that choice? What do I do? But, we did make a choice, because we said, look, it will be much better financially, emotionally, physically, if, one parent were to do that. Also, because I realized when I would spend weekends that I would really want to spend time with this child. I would want to be a part of his growing up. I would want to see how he paints, how he messes up, how he falls on his head. His growing up journey, I wanted to be a part of. So that's how I took that decision too. And no regrets, not 1 day of regret.
It was a dual income household. Between you and your then husband, you had to raise your hand to take a step back and take a back seat from your career. What I'm hearing is it was more of a maternal choice because you wanted to see your child grow than the societal fabric saying that the man of the house needs to go out and work, right? Am I reading that correctly?
You're absolutely right. It was more of a personal joint choice than society saying or any other external pressure that, give up your job. I wouldn't say there weren't those, aunts, uncles, neighbors who would see that, him like, ab to tumhara bachcha ho gaya hai, kaise jaoge kaam pe wapas? Because you're saying that, listen, why should I be doing this? Why should I not be doing this? You tell me. Just because I'm a woman, just because I'm a mother, I shouldn't be doing this. No, I'm going to do this. But then you have to sit with yourself quietly. I said, in order to prove them wrong, in order to listen to these noises, am I not going to make the choices that are actually in my interest and in my child's interest? So all those things are also real, because, you have to say, I also have my aspiration. Should I not be doing this? Should I not be doing that? Why should I not be doing that just because I'm a woman? But then, like I said, the important thing is to step back and close your eyes and say, forget the noises. There is an urge to say, because you don't want me to, I'm going to do it. But is it in my family's interest and in my child's interest? Then you find your own answers and then you take the step. But you go through those noises, you go through that rebellion, you go through that assertiveness, you go through all of that.
Yeah. So after your first 6-7 years of working in the technology firm, you chose to take a backseat for a few weeks, for a few months or a few years?
For a few years. So even though I was with the technology firm, technology was more of a deliverable, because I'm very fond of research, writing, learning excites me. So the medium of that delivery became technology and multimedia and internet. But my role primarily was designing, writing, researching, and then learning technology, because the delivery medium was that. So after 2 years, I took a break for about 2.5 years. And then after Achin started going to play school when he was almost 3. And then we spoke about me coming back to work. Even then I went through it. Acha, ab to bada ho gaya, ab to 3 saal ka ho gaya, ab to let me just try and look for a job now, or look for a half-time job or a part-time job. Or because that time working from home was nowhere on people's horizon. It wasn't a possibility. There was no freelancing. There were no freelancers.
you've always been far ahead of your times. Now it's really cool to be a gig worker or a freelancer. But back then, 20 years ago, when you took the call to operate on your own time as a freelancer, how did you find projects? How did you go about creating work for yourself, disciplining the time, that you'd put into work versus the time that you'd give towards childcare or towards home?
I honestly stumbled into my first project. I was reaching out to people specifically to associate part-time, associate half-day, associate. And one of my ex-clients who was, we happened to speak and we were, I said, okay, I'm looking for part-time, and I worked on a few projects when I was with organization. They don't have such a, concept of part-time, but should you ever come across something, or if you could spread the word around that I'm available for part-time or half-day work, or, And he said, I've seen your work and I have this small requirement. Are you open to working on a project basis? So it came and I was more than happy. I said, look, I've never done this before, but I'm more than happy to explore. So that is how I got my first project. And it just took on from there. One person telling the other, the third. But how do you keep it going? So it just led to increase in, word of mouth, increase in, after a point, of course, I did that because you needed more money, you needed more. And once you come back to it, come back to work, it is a self-fulfilling journey, actually. And you want to work towards it more and more and more. So I did start telling people consciously, look, if you know of anybody else, if you know of, so while I started doing that, there was also a non-negotiable thing where I would tell my clients, I will work only till my child is in play school. I will come for meetings only when he's away, because when he comes back, I want to be there. I want to be there when he comes back. I will work. So I had to work around those times when he was away, and then when work started growing, again, Sanjay was hugely supportive because, you don't always find clients locally. There were times I had to travel and he'd say, nahi yaar, I'll take 2 days off. You just go finish your work. So I found my support initially because the child is young, and also because you're trying to work and you're trying to grow and you're trying to establish and you're trying to do in whatever little way you can to do this. So there was support from the family, and of course, weekends, parents would pitch in if I needed to. So there was that kind of support.
Anupama, you've epitomized the saying that goes something like your calling is your own calling, or that the success is like very, very contextualized to every person. How did you not let success of your peers and friends and other people around you affect your own sense of self-worth?
By putting my own definitions of what I am worth. Honestly, there is no other way. Just about saying that it was my choice. Own the choices you make, whatever you make, whether it is for yourself. And I would say to mothers, don't feel guilty, yaar. Galat bhi hai choice, to forget it. You did what you could, whether you're choosing to go and your children are, it's your choice. If you feel you want to work and, be whenever you can the best way and balance both, fine, that is your choice. And don't let people tell you, listen, you made a bad choice because your children have turned out. No, children will turn out as schmucks, whether you are single parent, whether you are joint, whether you stay at home. So there are no prescriptions, there are no rules. So the two things I would say, don't feel guilty making choices, but own up the choices you make. I think having walked this journey, these are the two primary, I would say, things to live by, honestly.
Amazing. I feel we could go on for hours, but I do realize that we are at time. I wanted to ask before I let you go, Anupama, what is that one piece of advice that you would give to another woman who wants to have a career, be independent, while feeling that she's been a reasonably successful mother, if she chooses to be one?
Stop feeling guilty about the choices you make and own up your choice. I think that's the best thing I can say. I wouldn't like to give any other advice. Everybody has a different background, different emotional, psychological, physiological, sociological environment. Entirely different. There is no advice, absolutely no advice.
Very true. And there's nothing I can say that tops that. Anupama, it was a pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for making the time. And it was my honor and my pleasure to have you here today. And I think I'm walking away with lots of nuggets of wisdom that the listeners are going to love and cherish as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mridvika. You're doing a great thing in, just bringing a lot of women with different perspectives together. Kudos to you.
And that, listeners, was the episode of Just an Ordinary Mom podcast. If you are an ordinary mom or know someone who could benefit from listening to this podcast, do share it with them. This podcast was recorded at Manic Pod Studios in Chembur, Mumbai. Our sound engineer is Shreya Tiwari and our producer is Vedant Naik. Thanks for listening.